Today's video acts as a perfect example of the double standards when it comes to the rights of trans people. Members of the gender-critical ideology can sexually harass and even physically touch trans people and small children, yet if a trans person, especially a trans woman, so much as raises her voice, it's game over. I've been victim of this, many trans people I know have been victims of this, so let's talk about that. But first, I just need to give a quick content warning for the following: transmisia, sexual harassment, and flashing. If you like our work, please consider supporting the channel via Patreon. You can also support us by liking, commenting, and sharing this video on social media. Hey there, my name's Ethel Thurston, she, her, they, them, and today we're talking double standards. Today's video was brought to my attention thanks to former comedy writer turned full-time anti-trans bigot, Graham Linehan. Graham Linehan is perhaps best known for the time his then-wife, Helen Serafinowicz, divorced him and took the kids over his batshit anti-trans crusade. No, I'm not making that up. He confirmed with the Times last month that his dedication to being a bigoted shitbag in the quote, trans war, end quote, scuttled his marriage of 16 years. And whilst he claims that it was a noble deed carried out to protect her and the children from apparent trans people, there A, is no evidence of that, and B, this woman put herself front and centre in campaigning for abortion in Ireland, so is no stranger to controversy. It's fair to assume that she just doesn't want to be around him and his bigotry, just like his former friends. That's right! Graham told the Times that they'd taken to ghosting him, and as a result, he has been dropped from every job he had lined up, including the Father Ted musical he'd intended to be his pension. He even went so far as to say that he thinks his former friends are, quote, waiting for me to die, end quote, making him a strong candidate for the saddest man in history. The tweet Graham posted shared a short video posted by Ross Hunter, a journalist for the Scottish National, with Graham adding the caption, quote, "Oof, Gussie Grips, another hero," end quote, with Gussie Grips being the Twitter handle of Elaine Miller. Said video was taken at a protest hosted by human rights activists at the University of Edinburgh in response to a screening of Adult Human Female, an anti-trans propaganda piece. Thankfully the screening was cancelled for the second time, yet not without desperate attempts by anti-trans bigots to start a fight, as can be seen in the clip which was shared.
Film.
We're not here for your entertainment, bye-bye.
Not entertainment. So, finally, I want to thank and say that it's encouraging that we have the support of our staff unions, UCU and Unison, as well as wider community support from Lighthouse Books and student groups like Gender Liberation and USA. Thank you to Gender Liberation for helping with the banner making. And finally, thank you to everyone that has showed up today. This means such a great deal to those of us who are fighting this fight. And in want of not ruining the cabaret for too long with a lecture, I'm going to hand you back to Tom now.
Elaine Miller approaches human rights protesters who are sectioned off behind a barrier and attempts to yank away one of their placards before she begins physically touching both the individual she'd initially harassed as well as the person that comes over to place themselves between said victim and Miller. Thankfully, university staff intervene, at which point the video cuts out. This is arguably an act of common assault without battery, and dependent on what was being said, could also constitute sexual harassment and/or assault if Miller was simultaneously making remarks of a sexual nature towards the victim, a sadly common occurrence with those subscribing to the gender-critical ideology. To be clear on what I mean by common assault without battery, the threat of physical battery in touching someone without permission is enough on its own to legally constitute common assault. You don't need to beat someone or otherwise use unlawful force for it to be counted. That would be common assault with battery, which, if it caused injury, would make it assault causing actual bodily harm. There's also assault causing grievous bodily harm, which is more severe and/or premeditated, usually evidenced by the presence of a weapon. Point is, if your actions lead another to conclude that physical battery is likely to follow, that can legally constitute common assault without battery. Whether that to be acknowledged in the judicial system remains another question, but the argument can be made. So why is Miller doing this? Well, she's clearly attempting to elicit a response in her victim, preferably them reasserting their personal space on camera, so that gender-critical fascists can then run with said footage to make out that trans people and those that support them are intrinsically violent brutes. We saw this very thing in 2017 when fellow gender-critical fascist Maria McLachlan thought it'd be a brilliant idea to shoulder barge a group of human rights protesters and, when they naturally tried to push her away, grabbed one of them in a headlock, dragged them 10 feet away from their group, and began violently shaking them. That's when the human rights group realised what had happened and came running over to rescue their friend, with McLachlan being pushed to the ground in the ensuing scuffle. Gender-critical fascists then flocked to the papers, making this out to be the story of 4 transgender activists descending upon a sweet, innocent 60-year-old woman, brutally mugging her, in spite of the judge quite literally ruling that McLachlan had provoked the incident, denying her plea for compensation after her camera was broken when she was pushed over. There is a very real double standard, not just for trans people, but also disabled people and people of colour, in that any amount of aggression, even when completely justified, is used to demonize the group as a whole. As acknowledged in my Hyde Park video, this strategy is something known as reactive abuse, where the abuser provokes their victim into reacting violently, allowing them to flip the abuser-victim narrative. And whilst there's no interpersonal relationship involved here, it's still a tactic applied by oppressing forces. If you prod enough marginalized people for long enough, someone is going to snap, and you can use that to justify the initial oppression, thus creating an endless feedback loop. This is particularly true when the provoker is a cis white woman, which is why they have always played a central role in fascist oppression. From the Nazis to the KKK to the gender-critical ideology, the tactic has largely remained unchanged. Thankfully, people saw what Miller was doing and intervened, something I say not because her victim would have been in the wrong had they reacted more forcefully, but because the lashback they would have received had they done so would have been immense. I've been through just that for calling out an anti-trans bigot. I don't want others to go through that if there's another way. I still support them if they had, but it's great to see people looking out for them like that. Of course, people began to call Miller's actions out online, including the cabaret against the hate speech who had organised the protest, who replied to Ross Hunter's post with, quote, "Glad you caught Elaine Miller touching our lead artist without consent and intimidating our attendees," end quote, to which Miller herself responded, arguing that, quote, "Lead artist, were there artist, I booped you on the tummy to try and disarm your silliness. Gentle interventions can be effective. Mind you, my expertise is limited to managing toddlers. What's yours in?" End quote. This did not elicit the reaction Miller wanted, with many people demanding to know why she A, felt like she had the right to touch people in the first place, and B, why she was trivializing doing so. Though perhaps the strongest reply came in the form of someone pointing up at Miller's post, stating that it was, quote, "every abuser who ever groped me without permission," end quote. Because yeah, the way Miller is downplaying her actions is the very same way that many sexual predators downplay their violent behaviour towards vulnerable people, including children. And whilst what happened may not be on the same tier as touching of the crotch or chest, for many people the stomach is an area that most people just do not touch. It is an act that can feel very violating, and it was clearly done with the intent of provoking a reaction. Which, if you know anything about Miller, isn't all that surprising, considering her history of indecent exposure targeted at children and survivors of sexual violence. Because yes, the Elaine Miller in this video is the very same Elaine Miller who, on the 22nd of December 2022, flashed the Scottish Parliament after they passed the Gender Recognition Reform Bill. There were both children and survivors of sexual violence present at the time she did this, a fact that was known to her. Now, one thing I must note is that Miller was wearing a merkin, that is an artificial covering of hair for the pubic area. She didn't flash her own genitals. And I'm here to say, that doesn't lessen her crimes in my mind. Flashing is not violent in that genitals are present. If I walk into an art gallery, I'm going to see genitals. It's the means by which they're presented that is seeking to trigger distress in the victim, something that is caused whether or not a person is wearing a merkin. The response a person usually has is to immediately look away, not to study what they're looking at, so most people wouldn't be able to tell whether it was real or not. It reminds me of this really twisted thing I've heard of cis guys doing, in which they send girls fake out dick pics, pics that at a glance are meant to look like a penis, but are actually something else. They do this because they revel in the distress they cause others, just like Miller. Her actions sought to cause distress that is identical to when a person flashes using their own genitals. So yes, I do consider her to be a sexual predator, and yes, I do consider this post to be another red flag. If she feels comfortable enough to do this shit publicly, what is she doing to children behind closed doors? After all, every accusation by gender-critical fascists is just a confession. If you appreciate what we do here and want to help out, please consider becoming one of our wonderful patrons who make our work possible. On that note, we'd just like to thank the following people: Matthew Kovac, Gert Van Vorst, Hannah Banghart, Marble Wings, Sosh Daniels, Flynn, and Higgins the Seagull. And for myself, Adita and Levi, take care now.